This week's Parsha is, Parsha stands for portion. The best way to remember what Parsha means, just think a part, a portion. And this is Parshat Emor. Sounds like the Spanish word amor, meaning love, but it's not the same. Emor, or Emor in Hebrew, means to speak. To speak. So I guess you could, Emor, amor, you could speak love, right? But to speak. Chapter 21 of Leviticus, Vayikra. Chapter 21, verse 1. And God said to Moshe, say to the Kohanim, Aaron's son, and say to them, do not defile yourself for a dead person among your people. This is going to be a section that is talking about the holiness of the Kohen Gadol, or the Kohanim. The reputation of the verb say teaches that the elder should caution the young people about becoming defiled, according to Rashi. Say refers to prayers because Emor is similar to Marta, meaning you have spoken, which indicates praise. The Kohanim refers to the Torah. Aaron corresponds to justice. Since Aaron wore the breastplate of judgment, can also mean to illuminate. So the Kohanim, or the priesthood, had to maintain the highest level of holiness. Why was their holiness so very important? The reason why their holiness was so very important is they were the officiant, they officiated the people's korbaning, or drawing near to Hashem. And it was important that if that was not efficiently running, that would be considered a missing link in people's ability to draw near to God. The best analogy that I can have is one that we learn in supply chain logistics. Is we learn that in supply chain logistics, it's all great to have great planning. It's great to have great supply. It's good to have good providers if there's especially a need. But anywhere along that link, there can be a break, whether it be in shipping, whether it be in the transportation of the product, whether it be in the care and the custody of the product. At any level, if there's a break, it's going to affect what happens in the end of line. So bottom line is the Kohanim was given this immense responsibility to guard the office of the priesthood. Unlike today, in which we hear of religious leaders all across the world in different religious organizations, convicted from everything from pedophilia to racketeering and God knows what. The other night, my wife and I saw where a guy was ended up before it was all over had strangled his wife in a closet. This was a pastor of a church, and had been sexting messages to young girls in the congregation, and had a relationship with someone that used to be in the congregation, no longer is, that he was abusing as well. The Kohanim, as we know, carried this responsibility very seriously. It said that verse 2, someone starts reading at verse 2 for me. I'm sorry, let's finish with verse 1. Let no priest defile himself with any dead among his people. Now go to 2.
Except for the relative who is closest to him, to his mother and to his father, to his son, to his daughter, and to his brother, and to his virgin sister who is close to him, who has not been wed to a man. To her shall he contaminate himself. A husband among his people shall not contaminate himself to one who desecrates him.
Are you at verse 4, at the end of verse 4?
Yes.
Okay, stop right there. So, the issue is this. Why should he not touch a dead body or be in a situation of mourning or funeral? Is it about the mourning? Is it about the body? What's it about?
About purity.
About purity, ritual purity. So it wasn't about Hashem was being approved. Didn't want him to be mourning a family member. He could only go to the funeral of a family member that was a direct family member. Right? And if it was a sister, she had to be alive without, obviously alive, I'm sorry, not married, and she needed to be a virgin and not married. Any questions about that before we move on? Verse 5 says, they must not shave patches of the hair from their head or the edges of their beard or gnash their teeth. They must be holy before God, their God, and not profane the name of God, for they offer the offerings of the Lord, an offering of their God of their God they offer. Therefore, they must be holy. This sort of echoes the same thing that we heard a couple of portions ago, where God calls the people and says to Moshe, tell them to be holy as I am holy, right? So the priests are called to even a higher level of holiness. This level of holiness, talking about patches of their hair, not to pull patches of their hair, pluck the beard, the gashes or the gashes in the skin or gashes skin have to directly do with what? Paganism, but what specifically in paganism? The mourning of the dead, right? Have you ever seen? Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like pull your hair out. You know. First of all, it was inappropriate anyway, but on top of that, death, in the sense of death, that this was something that was completely forbidden. It says, they shall not marry a woman who had illicit sex, or one who profaned herself, nor take one who was divorced from her husband. For he is holy before his God. You must treat him as holy, since he offers the offerings of your God. He must be holy to you, for I, the Lord, who sanctify you, am holy. An interesting phrase that takes place here. Let's first talk about the whole concept of not being able to marry someone who is divorced. At some level, it's...
For the Cohen.
Say again?
You're specifically talking for the Cohen.
For the Cohen. Okay. Yeah. For the priest itself. So the priest could not marry a divorcee. However, there is something within the Midrashic literature that says that after Yom Kippur, there is also some provisions that can be looked at. That she gets purified. That once after Yom Kippur, after her husband's dead, she's purified. Then they can marry if she is a Kohen, right? So he can't marry outside of the nation of Israel for sure. So, but for sure he can't take someone who is not a virgin. And illicit sex and all those things are absolutely forbidden. But at the same time, what would be the result if a high priest were to engage in illicit sex?
They couldn't do the sacrifice.
Correct. So he would not be ritually pure. It's not like that all of a sudden he would be exiled out of the priesthood. Okay. So this was about recognizing there was a need for holiness, but at the same time, we've got to understand that even though it's not dealt with here in Midrashic literature, we have answers as to what would happen if these situations would be altered in any way. You must treat him holy. Verse 8 says, you must treat him holy, since he offers the offerings of your God. Let me find that verse, because there was something I wanted to comment on. The Macharim and Rashi refer to the Babylonian Talmud, which interprets this verse to teach that Jews must treat priests as holy by allowing them to open proceedings, start grace after meals, and be called to the Torah first. Offering, that is, they are to be given a place of honor in the service in the community. Even to this day, if there is a synagogue service that takes place, if someone knows that a Kohanim is there, he is responsible for the first aliyah, correct? He comes up responsible for first aliyah. But it's more than just treat him as holy. This is not the type of treatment of holiness as you would see in Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholicism reaches over and kisses the ring of the Pope, and you understand. This is not the same type of
person worship.
Yes, correct. It's a sense, not a person worship, is what she said. This is more of a sense of This is the person that Hashem has put in a very responsible position in this community. Therefore, whenever the community is going to be doing something together, then we make sure that he is out front to officiate whatever we're doing. It's part of his leadership role. We do that it's today much the same. I mean,
it's respect.
It's respect. If we have a politician that shows up, at some community meeting, they always obviously give him favor and want him to open up in the meeting. That's what it's about. But there's another level that goes beyond that. And here's the level that's interesting. Since you know he is holy, since you know he has immense responsibility, it is your responsibility to make sure that he remains holy. Does that make sense? You have a responsibility to the Kohanim to make sure he's holy. Meaning, if you are ritually impure, if you have touched the dead body, you don't shake his hand, you don't touch him. Right? If you are in any way, you have been made impure, you want to make sure that you don't make him impure. How about another level? Let's say that you see a Kohanim in a situation in which he would become ritually impure. You have an obligation to keep him holy before Hashem.
Yeah.
You have an obligation to let him know, hey, do you realize this is not kosher? Right? Very important. Very important. There's a story today that I heard from a Holocaust survivor who said that he tells the story of a Greek Jewish family, a Greek Jewish man, that was being hidden by a Greek family. Who was a Cohen. And the Greek man was approached by the Nazis after someone turned him over and said, hey, this guy is keeping a Jew, is hiding a Jew. And he had made the Greek Cohen, the Jewish Cohen, to promise him if something ever happens to him that you would take care of it. He would take care of his family, marry his wife, make sure that you take care of her. And when the Germans finally came to confront him, he denied it and they killed him. They killed the Greek man.
He wouldn't give up the Cohen.
He wouldn't give up the Cohen. And the Cohen, out of an obligation to this man, married his wife and took care of his children. Now, would the Cohen be forbidden to do that? Well, if he wants to continue in temple worship, most definitely. Mm-hmm. His children wouldn't be Cohen. They're Greeks. So that means he's forbidden to marry outside of the Jewish community, correct? But at the same time, halakhically, there's a different understanding. I mean, this is like so unique. The time that we're existing in, it's a very unique situation. And who are we to judge? But this is one of those very difficult things that you look at. And obviously, we can't be armchair quarterbacks because we've not lived through such a horrific experience. Verse 9 says, somebody read...
But you're talking about the high priest. Or is every Cohen...
Every Cohen is held to this same standard. They are not to marry outside of the family, the Cohen, and they are not to marry someone who's divorced. So all that, yeah, exactly. Verse 9 says, when a priest's daughter has been profaned because she had illicit sex, it is from the holiness of her father that she has been profaned. This is a very interesting subject. The end of verse 9 says, she must be burned in fire. Let's look at verse 9. The commentary on verse 7, and this passage is in contrast to verse 7. A Targumist transforms the Hebrew active form to a passive, apparently because he felt that it would fit the verse better than the active form. However, the word here may mean begin as maintained or made herself easy. That means she's begun to become what's the word for it? Promiscuous. Ghettoish. I don't know. What's another word for it? Promiscuous. Loose. Hoochie, that's what I was... Who said that? You said that? Yeah, if you're watching and you're like not from this area, hoochie, you wouldn't have any clue what that means. But that's another street term for loose. From the holiness of. It says here, it is from the holiness of her father that she has been profaned. How does a priest's daughter who has illicit sex degrade her father? How does he degrade the father? How does she? Rashi, in the Babylonian Talmud, explains that she profaned and disgraced her father's honor by her actions because people will say, "Cursed be he who was responsible for her birth and raised her." Our translators addressed this question and resolved it by focusing on the misbehaving daughter rather than her father. He does it by making the three changes in the sentence. He replaces the Torah's et with the letter mem, from, as in Exodus 9:29. He adds the holiness of, which clarifies what she has profaned. He turns the mechlet into the reflective form, thereby making the daughter of the person who is profaned, not her uninvolved father. Thus, she either profaned herself entirely or just lowered herself from his level of holiness. So this whole contrast is set to say, when she commits this, when she becomes loose, there's a series on TV called The Preacher's Daughter. I don't know if you ever saw it, but this is what it reminds me of. When she becomes real loose, who is she profaning, herself or her father? A father. Why? Because what will people be saying? He's obviously, if he's not been a good father, how can he be a good priest? Now, is that necessarily true? No. Now, we all know that just because your children are knuckleheads doesn't mean that you're the idiot.
Exactly.
Right? But what do people in the neighborhood say?
But you're an example.
You must have done you must not have raised your children right. Yes, Jeremy?
When you say loose, from my understanding from Rashi and all the sages, this only applies to a married or betrothed woman,
Correct.
And not a single woman.
Correct.
And
Absolutely.
there's a distinction there.
Right.
The single woman might not be right in what she's doing, but she wouldn't be held for the death penalty.
Correct. Absolutely. Very, very good. I'm glad you
Yeah,
clarified
some
that.
of
I'm
them
glad you did.
right.
Did you guys understand that? This is not a single young woman, but a married woman or
Go around
betrothed
and find
woman.
all the single women that are loose right around town.
Lord, no, if we did, we wouldn't have any left, right? No, just
That's
Yeah. The world needs hoochie mamas. Anyway, that's terrible. I will delete that. I will delete that.
Thank God.
Melanie.
Yeah, she's gonna hear it.
Yeah.
It does bring down the standard. The Cohen would be concerned, even if this were in his family and they didn't, do the execution. It would bring down the level of standard and purity, even in his heart,
Right.
which basically work out into the family with more impurity.
Right.
I would think.
Well, something now. Remember. Now, let me just in case you're listening to this, you're watching it, or you're sitting there contemplating, thinking, "Wow, that's pretty tough." You mean if the priest's daughter who is married commits adultery, then she can be executed? That's pretty tough. First of all, there's never been a record that that's ever happened.
Right.
That's number one. There's no place in the Torah where they ever said that took place. And I would have a feeling that if they will list this very innocuous event of a man picking up sticks on the Shabbos that was stoned, then I'm sure they would have listed a woman who had committed adultery, who was a priest, who was burned. So that's the number one thing. Number two is this. To convict a person of a crime was very difficult. Why was it difficult, guys?
Two
You know this.
witnesses there.
Two witnesses, but the two witnesses, right? They had to be tzaddikim. Righteous people, right?
Right.
So, which meant that not only should these two witnesses, or these two witnesses must have the ability to have seen the crime themselves. It cannot be secondhand. It cannot be, hearsay evidence. It just cannot be. Have to witnesses. Not only that, but these individuals must be without any blame according to the Torah.
Correct.
Right? Now, we live in a pretty just society. We try to think we're as just people, right? But how many people have been committed adultery, have been accused of adultery by people who have been adulterous themselves? Do you think that No, it doesn't hold any water. So, the case is this. This is not just a simple case of someone saying they committed adultery, let's go kill them. Okay, that's something other societies do, not Hashem society. Let's see, what verse are we in now? Chapter 10, someone read.
The Kohen who is exalted above his brethren, upon whose head the anointment of oil has been poured, or who has been inaugurated to don the vestments, shall not leave his head unshorn, and shall not rend his garments. He shall not come near any dead person. He shall not contaminate himself to his father or his mother. He shall not leave the sanctuary, and he shall not desecrate the sanctuary of his God. For a crown, his God's oil of anointment, is upon him. I am Hashem.
Okay. This is the High Kohen Gadol, right? The High Kohen Gadol, this is the one who is anointed. What does anointed mean in Hebrew? What's a famous word that everybody throws out? Mashiach. So he's the Mashiach, right? He is a Mashiach, right? The High Kohen Gadol, when he's anointed, can't touch your body. He's got to keep himself pure. Can't shave his head. Can't pluck his beard out. He is supposed to be at the highest level of purity and holiness. He must marry a virgin. He may not marry a widow, divorcee, or one who was profaned or had illicit sex. He may only marry a virgin of his own people. He will not profane his seed among his people. For I, the Lord, have sanctified him. I mean, over and over we hear how God has sanctified them and He is holy. But this same level of holiness also extends to the people of God. Because it says, for you are holy. But the requirements of the High Kohen Gadol are different than the rest of the people. So even though in the eyes of Hashem, there are different roles and responsibilities of the people, the High Kohen Gadol puts his pants on the same way the other men put their pants on, right? The difference is his responsibilities are different before Hashem than our own responsibilities. The Lord spoke to Moshe, saying, speak with Aaron and say, no male among your sons who has a blemish throughout the generations may offer an offering before God. No male who has a blemish may offer a sacrifice. No male who is blind or lame, or has sunken nose, or a limb too long, or a male with a broken leg or broken arm, or one who is hunchback or dwarf, or one who has a disease in his eyes, or sore, or scab, or a crushed testes, no man among the seed of Aaron, the priest, who has a blemish may approach the altar to offer the sacrifices of the Lord. Since he has a blemish, he may not approach to offer the sacrifice of his God. He may not eat the sacrifice of his God he may eat the sacrifice of his God from the most holy as well as from the holy. But he may not come into the curtain or approach the altar, since he has blemishes. He must not profane my secret place, for I am the Lord, have sanctified him. Moses spoke of these matters and with Aaron and with his sons and with the Israelites. Does it sound like that Moshe is violating the, what do they call it, the American Disabilities Act? What's it called?
Yes.
Americans Disability Act. Do you think that would be a violation of ADA rules?
Absolutely.
Discrimination.
Right. So let me ask you, if that's discrimination, so does that mean that the Army is discriminating as well against people with disabilities? Or the Navy, or the Marine Corps, or the
They
SEALs?
couldn't
No,
do
they
their
can do the
job if there
job.
were certain.
Do what?
If there were certain deficits physically, they couldn't do their job.
Right.
Correct.
They couldn't see.
Correct.
They couldn't walk, so forth and so on.
So the whole point is though it would seem that they're being, what's the word for it, discriminated? They were. But they were discriminating in the same way that corporations discriminate against individuals that they hire. not based on race or creed, but you cannot do a job if you physically you cannot do it.
Correct.
Right? Yes, ma'am.
This may be going in a wrong direction, but would it follow that if the offering that is to be brought is to be perfect without defect,
Yes.
that the one bringing
By
it
all
would
means,
be without
by all
defect?
means, that is at the most obvious level. That's the
Yes,
truth.
Yes.
That is the truth, because you don't. That would almost be as if you're going to have a meal served to you in a very fine restaurant. A king, let's say a king, is going to have a meal served to him, and yet this very sumptuous meal is being brought out by a guy who's crippled, who's blind, who's bumping into walls and spilling stuff all over the place. It's not appropriate to approach the king and to bring him his meal this way, and that's what this is about. But it goes further than that. If a man is not capable of standing up to the heights to cast the meat above, I mean, they had to throw huge portions of meat on this altar. You couldn't afford to have limbs that are broken, right? So there's a whole concept here. Now, what about this concept of the crushed testes? What is that concept? This is a person who has ritually been through or allowed himself to ritually be made a eunuch, which is a pagan idea. It's not a religious thing
Right.
from Judaism, and for sure forbidden by Hashem to destroy yourself, destroy your reproductive capabilities.
I think that's why Daniel never went back. The
You know?
prophet Daniel. Because he was a eunuch.
That's right. He was made a
and
eunuch
he
after
stayed
he
in
was.
Babylon.
Was Daniel
was he-
Kohanim? Was Daniel Kohanim? I can't remember.
I think. but
Somebody do
I
a quick
can't
little,
remember.
I
a
can't
quick
Google
little
right now.
search and see if he was. It'd be interesting because many of the prophets were Kohanim, right?
Right, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The Kohen Gadol, Rashi says here that he must be married when he performs the service of Yom Kippur.
Right.
I did not know that.
Yes. So ultimately we realized that the High Kohen Gadol, if he's not married, he's not become complete.
Right,
That's the whole point.
gotcha.
So,
I just never read this part.
the Pope not being married.
Cannot be a High Kohen Gadol.
Correct.
Right. So why is it?
Somebody else.
You know, my wife and I have the same. We've been married long enough that we can.
Oh, she's not here.
She's not here, but she'll confirm this, right, honey? You'll confirm this. Have you ever been around a grown-up person
I knew what you were going to say.
that's never, ever, ever been married? And they're like,
Oh, yes.
In their
50s,
50s,
60s.
60s. Mhm.
Yes.
aren't they kind of quirky?
Yes.
Not all.
Oh.
No, just wait. Not all, but I'm
Yeah,
saying.
But that
But I'm
also
saying.
means no sexual affairs or anything.
No, it doesn't matter to me. It's just that not having a spouse underdevelops a certain side of you in some cases.
Yes.
Correct? Not in all cases, but in some cases.
Yeah.
The reason why I say not in all cases, because there are people who develop a strong sense of bearing and maturity that they're able to do it. But I've also met people that they needed a spouse. They needed a wife, especially guys. Not so much about women.
Right, right.
Well, look
But-
at priests and nuns.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because I had someone dear that my wife and I have known, never been married, and just has idiosyncrasies and quirks that sets him apart from everybody. I mean, he doesn't think of anything about food in his beard and dripping down while he's eating. I mean, and then if you say, hey, you have soup in your beard, he doesn't wipe it with a napkin. He rubs it with his hand into his beard.
That's
Right?
also a possibility as to why you never got married.
Absolutely the truth. Very good possibility why he didn't get married. But that's what I'm talking about. He just has these idiosyncrasies that if he was married, his wife would go, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not
But you're right, the completeness, because you're not sharing with someone else
correct.
all of that.
So we understand that Eve came out of Adam.
Correct.
There's a midrashic description that says that Adam and Eve were the same. It was like two faces of Adam, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was the Eve and the Adam. And that simply God separate them. I mean, that's a mystical understanding to say that when Adam was on this earth, deep down in his core, he was made perfect.
Correct.
He was made complete,
Yeah, he had everything.
right? He had everything that he ever needed. And then when Adam felt that he needed a helpmate, he needed someone else tangible outside of himself, God separated Eve from him. Does that make sense? And so with Eve being separated from him, so that's why that marriage becomes a very important thing in Judaism especially. Soulmate. Finding someone that completes you. And, finding that person that helps to grow you and to make you a better person. And in some cases, we all know we live in a society where divorce rate's 48%? So not always the other person makes you a good person, okay? Yeah. So that's why you got to make sure that by fear of Hashem, you marry the right person. And if you can't find the right person, you don't get married, right? That's the good idea. Here we go. Where are we at now? Let me see. I might want to stop there. Let's see. We stopped at 21. Let's see.
24.
Yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. That's going to conclude the class. We'll go back. We'll go into 22 when we come back. Let's see. I don't know. We could probably go into 22. What time is it now?
It's only.
Oh, we still have time. Yeah. Let's go into 22. Someone start reading on chapter 22.
Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, that they shall withdraw from the holies of the children of Israel, that which they sanctify to me, so as not to desecrate my holy name. I am Hashem. Say to them, throughout your generations, any man from among any of your offsprings who shall come near the holies, that the children of Israel may sanctify to Hashem with his contamination upon him. That person shall be cut off from before me. I am Hashem. Any man from the offspring of Aaron who has a metzorah or a zav shall not eat from the holies until he becomes purified. And one who touches anyone contaminated by a corpse, or a man from whom there is a seminal emission, or a man who touches any swarming thing through which he can become contaminated, or a person through whom he can become contaminated, whatever his contamination. The person who touches it shall be contaminated until the evening. He shall not eat from the holies unless he has immersed his body in the water. After the sun has set, he shall become purified. Thereafter he may eat from the holies, for it is his food. He shall not eat from a carcass or from a torn animal to be contaminated through it.
Okay,
I am Hashem.
Yeah, pause right there. This is purely. This is about ritual purity. Okay, just purely ritual purity. This is not about if he is any of these things have happened to him, he's a sinner. Okay, right. This is about purity and the ability to do temple work. You guys are nurses, so you understand this whole idea of what do you call it? Sterilization, being in sterile environments and work, contamination. Hospitals can be the most germ-infested places, right? Right? They are, right? I understand. And even with all of the modern technology of the lights and filtration systems, if you're really sick, a hospital's probably not a place you want to go unless you're dying, correct? Because you could go there and get something else. But at the same time, like a surgery room, it's got to be extremely sterile, and they go to these extreme measures to make sure that environment's sterile. Why? Because they're opening you up, and they're going into your holy place. They're going into your body, and to open that up to infection. So if you can picture the temple being like the very core center of the people's relationship with God, is like the most highly sensitive place in the world, and when that is opened up, nothing unclean can come in it. Now, it doesn't mean, once again, that this person, the priest, is a sinner. It means that he's ritually impure. It talks about touching of the dead body. Let's see, one who is, once again, it goes back to this whole thing. It says, before me, let's see, there was a verse here that said, in essence, it was saying that you have to make sure that he remains at his highest level of purity. He can't eat of the offering until he washes And then, of course, at sunset, after he washes, he can eat. Verse 9, they must keep the charge of my word in wisdom so that they do not receive guilt because of it and die for it if they profane it. I, the Lord, sanctify them. What does it mean for them to take the guilt? What does it mean for them to take a guilt? Best way to describe that in a more of a modern sense would be I'm an electrician, and I understand that I'm not really an electrician, if I were an electrician. And I understand the properties of current flow, understand conductivity, highly trained in all those areas. But yet, if I decide to stick my screwdriver in one of those big 220-volt systems and not make sure that it's been properly labeled and shut off, then I am taking the guilt of that act by putting my screwdriver in the system. Or otherwise, if I follow the protocol according to OSHA standards, etc., before I even put my screwdriver in it, I need to make sure that the power system is shut off, right? That it's properly labeled. And that is what it means by them taking on the guilt. If they are not ritually pure, then they are opening themselves up to become guilty of not being pure, and therefore being judged. What happened to Aaron's two sons? Aaron's two sons were guilty. What were they guilty of? They were guilty of bringing strange fire before God. So the whole point was they went out of the step. They put the screwdriver in the 220 before they should have. So that's the whole concept that they're talking about. Let's see, where are we at? Verse 10, no lay person shall eat a holy thing. What is it talking about, a holy thing? What is he talking about?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice. Good. No resident of a priest or hired labor may eat the holy thing. So that means what would happen is when a family would come and offer up an offering, there were certain offerings that portions of the meat went to the Kohanim, went to the priest. That's how the priest fed their family. That's how they brought home the tongue-in-cheek bacon, but that's how they brought home the bull, right, or the sheep. They would bring that home and they would share it with their family. But a slave in the household, were they permitted to eat of that meat?
Yes.
Okay, talk to me.
A slave of the Kohen.
The slave of the Kohen.
Right, that's all.
But the slave of a neighbor cannot.
Cannot.
And the
Just
neighbor
the Kohen.
cannot. Right? So, no layperson, meaning non-priest, may eat a holy thing. No resident of a priest or hired laborer. That is the difference between a slave, okay? So a resident or hired laborer may eat a holy thing. However, if a priest purchase someone a money purchase, he may eat it, meaning an individual that he hires as a slave. Now remember, the economy of that time, slavery was how you worked for another lamb. And if you think that you're not a slave, then
Right.
tell me that tomorrow when you go to work and punch in your clock and come home, right? You are a slave. Somebody has hired you. What's the name of your slave master? Don't want to say it on camera? Yeah, Exxon Mobil, whomever, right? You know, Halliburton. These are the people that hire you out, and that's who you work for. It says, a priest's daughter who marries a layman, she may not eat of the sacred gifts. However, a priest's daughter who is a widow or divorced, who has no child, and who has returned to a father's house as in her youth, she may eat of the bread of her father, but no lay person may eat it. If a person eats a holy thing unwittingly, he must add a fifth to it and give the priest the holy thing. They, that is the priest, must not profane the holy thing of the Israelites, that which is set aside before the Lord, and shall cause them to receive guilt and a penalty. So there were certain of the offerings that when they be brought to the Lord, they were to be only put on the altar, and it was to be burnt on the altar. If the priest thought, wow, that back strap looks really good.
Yeah.
I think I'll slide it in my bag and bring it home. Then he's going to be made guilty for that because he can't even touch those things. So only certain things.
Wasn't that one of the things that Eli's sons did?
Eli's sons, I can't remember. What was the story?
Eli, wasn't it Eli? Eli
Talking about Aaron?
You talking about Aaron's sons? No, Eli's son.
Prophet Eli before, Samuel, who was it Samuel lived with when he was a boy? Wasn't it Eli?
Yeah, Eli.
Yeah, well, his sons, there was one of his sons that he didn't restrain his sons.
Yeah, in the back of my mind, the story's there, but
But they ate sacrifices they were supposed to or something.
Yeah.
He didn't restrain them, and then I remember he was off the chair and died.
Right, yeah, well, that's,
So I think
That's
it
interesting. I need to go back and read that
I
story.
don't think there'll be many
Sacrifices they weren't
priests
supposed to.
saying that steak looks good,
no. I don't
not
think
the
so.
way they live.
No. When any man from a house of Israel or a convert in Israel brings his sacrifice, whether of vows or freewill offering, which are brought before the Lord as a burnt offering, to be acceptable, it must be without blemish, a male from the cattle, sheep, or goats. You may not offer any that has a blemish, for it will not be acceptable to you. When a man offers a holy sacrifice before the Lord, separated for a vow or as a free offering of the cattle or flock, it must be perfect to be accepted. It must have no blemish. Blind or broken or maimed, with a split eyelid or nose or lip or sore or scab, you may not offer these before the Lord. No offering may be given to them on the altar before the Lord. An ox or a sheep or with a limb too long or too short may be a free will offering, but it will not be accepted for a vow. We go through these animals that are to not be offered because of their blemishes. What is so important about the blemish of the animal before Hashem? Why can it not be perfect? Because this is about offering the best that you have to Hashem, right? What was Cain's conviction? What did he do wrong? To bring the least. Right. It wasn't the fact that Cain brought vegetables and fruit. It was the fact that Cain brought the least of his garden to God. And at the same time could have repented over the whole thing. But he didn't have it within him to do it, right? He
got angry.
He got angry at God. It's like, even though God tells him very clearly, sin's at the door, it's crouching there, but you can conquer sin. He doesn't do it. He continues on with his transgression. So the idea is to bring God your best. Once again, we all understand that in this modern age. Hindsight's a great thing, knowing that it's a great relationship with God that we bring him our best. I talked to Rabbi Katz this morning early, and he was talking about the Ger Toshav, and he received a great blessing from one of the key individuals in Israel about the concept of the Ger, the non-Jew who takes on the yoke of heaven and studies Torah. He was explaining to this very important person in his life that he needed to get the okay to say, you know what, you're on target, this is a good thing. He's explained to the rabbi, well, you've got to understand the Ger Toshav. These are individuals within the nations here, in the nations that live today, that want to study Torah, that want to take on the yoke of heaven, that are eager to love Hashem with their whole heart, but at the same time are not expecting anything in this physical world. Only that when redemption comes, that they have a place with the people of God. And the rabbi's like, are they nuts? Why would they want to do that? That doesn't make sense. Why would anybody want to commit themselves to Hashem and walking in Torah and study of Torah without any of, living in the land of Israel and having all of the benefits of being a Jew in Israel? And Rabbi Katz was so happy to tell him, these people are unique in our generation. These are people who have committed themselves to Torah, committed themselves to God purely out of their love for Hashem. That's the difference. And one of the things that I do know that you know, and those who are watching clearly understand this concept, that this whole idea of the priest and bringing your offerings and making sure your offerings are pure is something that you understand deep down inside. I mean, you don't even want to offer up a prayer that comes across lips and a tongue that has been laced with evil and wickedness and negative speech and gossip, etc. Because you realize that is a blemished prayer. Does it make sense? If you hate, last week we talked about in Kodashim, about loving your fellow, loving your neighbor as yourself, right? It's like the epitome of Torah. But how can we say that we genuinely love our neighbor when we speak evil against them, when we do things intentionally to hold them responsible over your anger and some sense of obligation to you? Then it's important for us to know that these offerings that we bring to Hashem in our lifestyle and our behavior need to be of its very best. Its very best. That's why the sages say, for those who are wanting to take on the yoke of Torah, especially the non-Jew, don't worry about 316. Don't worry about that. Just love Hashem with your whole heart. Start with the what? What'd you say?
Not 316, 613.
613.
Yes.
I was thinking the half the guys have to do. I'm sorry. No. 613. Thank you. It's the dyslexia again, right? So it's the 613. Don't worry about that. Just worry about loving Hashem with your whole heart. Start with that. Take the seven Sheva mitzvot. Take the 7 mitzvot. Do those with perfection. Become what we call the Orthodox ger. Right? Does that make sense? An Orthodox ger. I'm going to love Hashem with my whole heart. I'm going to love His Torah. I'm going to study Torah. And I'm going to do the 7 Sheva mitzvot, the 7 mitzvahs, with my best of my ability. See, it's better to do 7 at your best than 613 and halfway do them. Right? So we're really in a very beautiful place to be in the world that we're living in. At the same time, rarely are those who are the ger or the bnei noach in the world are satisfied with just doing 7. Why? Because they love Hashem so much, they're willing to do everything and not have any benefits for them. Because what motivates the bnei noach in the world? Love for Hashem. If last week was a story of loving our neighbor as ourselves, for the world, the B'nai Noach is going to teach them that we love Hashem more than we love ourselves. And that is an incredible blessing to be able to understand that. And there are many people who listen to this class on the internet, and they will attest to the fact that one day when their soul woke up and they learned to take on the yoke of heaven, when they began to take it on, how their lives were transformed and made different. And in many aspects, when they read a text about bringing an offering to Hashem that's perfect, they reach for that deep level of spiritual perfection that is very important to them. That concludes the class. Everyone say shalom. Shalom. Or in Texas, bye y'all.